Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely unput-downable, beautiful, sad, thrilling, lovely book. It is so many things, and I am so excited to talk about this debut. Welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Zoë Rankin, and my debut, The Vanishing Place, came out just last month in the US. Do you want me to give a little quick what it's about?
Absolutely.
So it's set on the west coast of the South Island of New Zealand, which is a very rugged, very atmospheric kind of place where not many people and where the weather is big. It's wet, it's cold, and I've set it in a little village called Koroha, which is Te Reo Māori for wilderness. And so on one side, you've got the vast ocean. On the other side, you have vast bush. And there's only 90 people live in this little village town. And one day, in the only little supermarket, a girl stumbles through the front door. She's about 8. She's dirty. She's got blood on her. She seems ravenous, a little bit wild. And of course, this spooks the locals. But then what spooks them more is the fact that she looks almost identical to a little girl who disappeared into the bush 20 years previously. And so it's about the local community starting to realize what secrets are hidden in this bush that we live nearby, what secrets that we're connected to, and the past starts to reveal itself in unusual ways connected to this girl who disappeared 20 years ago, who actually you learn very early on is alive and is actually living in Scotland, and she's back to help solve the case of what's happened to this little mute girl who won't actually talk, where she's come from, what's happened to her, and it involves going deep into the woods and off grid where nobody goes, and yeah.
There's something almost, sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like instinctual, like it feels like a fairy tale sort of woods, like they are beautiful and expansive and welcoming, but also terrifying, and they could be claustrophobic. And there's so much really interesting imagery and moods around the wilderness in your book. Before we get into that too much, could you tell us a little bit about your journey to writing and the inception point for this novel? Was it a particular character or a setting or just the mood?
So my writing journey, I think, began in the way that lots of maybe writers do, where you kind of scribble ideas on your computer and you kind of second guess every word that you write, but then you realize you love it, so you keep having a go at it. And then I think it was just you go into bookshops and you look around and there's just so many books, and you're like, well, everyone here managed to get the book published and on a shelf, so people do it. This dream can come true. So I would go back to my computer and keep writing. And of course, I've got a few manuscripts on my computer that will never see the light of day. And then I did writing courses online to kind of refine my craft. And then I guess the idea for this book came partly from my love of the outdoors. My family and I were very into hiking in the bush and biking in the bush. And I just, coming from Scotland, where there's no trees and you can see for miles and miles and miles, and then now living in New Zealand, where it's just this claustrophobic kind of, it's hard to explain how easy it is to get lost if you go. They had this of a little girl falling out of the bush, and she's there, and where she came from. And that kind of just started this whole concept for this novel.
Yeah, I'm really curious about the ways that your love of the outdoors and your explorations shaped both Effie, and I guess how you present parts of her childhood. I'd love to know about, yeah, shaping her, how much you drew on your own love of the woods, especially if you have like strategies and tactics that you've developed for your own explorations, and how maybe that like shapes her ambivalence about the woods, because obviously she had a difficult childhood, but she does sort of have this longing for the wilderness. Does that kind of make sense, or?
Yeah, very much so. So I come from a very small village myself, and I guess, and I've always just enjoyed being outside where there's, more trees than there are people, and I'm always drawn back to that, always, no matter where I go. And I guess that pool exists in Effie, so I find that very easy to write because that's how I feel. So I live in New Zealand now, but I've just been back in Scotland on a holiday for a month. And it's like you go into these open, wild places that you grew up in, and you just, I don't know, you just suddenly it's easier to breathe. It just feels right, like that's where you're meant to be. And so coming here and writing a story about a girl who grew up in the New Zealand bush, I guess that come for me, it was because I spend so much time in the bush. I felt I wasn't having to recreate a world. I was just writing in a world that I know quite well. And so what I would do, for example, is I would, as research, I would go into the bush, which I do on a weekly basis, but rather than, just doing my hike or whatever, I would just stop and I would feel the bush with all five senses, and particularly looking up. I feel a lot of people don't look up. And so it would just be looking up, seeing the way. It's almost like looking in one of those, I can't remember the name of it. Is it a kaleidoscope? Is that the right word? And
Mhm.
you look and like, but rather than being all these sparkles, it's like leaves, overlapping leaves. And then another time that I kind of got this sense of that in the bush, it's a very thin line you tread between fear and awe of the beauty of it. And it was when I was in the bush with my daughter, who's about 5, when we were just hiking, which we do a lot. And we have to talk about bush safety with her quite a lot because it's a real thing. And she had a 5-year-old moment where I must have done something that upset her, I don't know, and she just bolted. And it's within like seconds, she just disappears. She's just swallowed up by the bush and the leaves and the trees. And you just get this sudden like feeling. And I think that I just wanted to capture that with Effie, the sense that when you're in the bush, it really is so easy to so quickly get lost. And I think it's a very foreign environment to people who don't spend much time in that kind of dense vegetation. So
Mm.
yeah, in terms of I would just go into the bush, I would just try and experience with my five senses. All of the places in the bush are real places. So I actually spent a lot of time on like maps, looking up rivers and the way that the land is formed. And I also have spent many nights in rural cabins in New Zealand. So all of the things in the cabin are based on aspects of real cabins that I've stayed in.
That makes a ton of sense to me because the book is so richly descriptive of the experience of being in the bush through, as you say, the visual description and the sensory experience, but also that emotional experience and how volatile it is. It could turn from comforting and inviting to dangerous on a moment's notice. And that real sense of risk is captured very well in the book.
Thank you.
So, as we hinted at before, Effie had a rather difficult childhood that you explore through dual timelines, where you show her experience in the wilderness as well as Anya, the little girl who comes out of the woods in the prologue. Can you talk about um, how you approach interweaving the narratives and how like that came out in your writing process? Did you have each timeline's trajectory, was it like decided and cemented before you embarked on writing, or did the experience of writing them sort of help you determine the outcome? Like, how much did they inform each other as you were writing them?
So I didn't actually plan anything for this novel at all.
Mm.
You can't search my office and find a book of notes or anything because there just were none. So basically, as you read it as a reader is how I wrote it. So I would write one timeline and then the next and then the next and jump back and forth just as I was writing with no clear idea of where they were going. I maybe, rather than knowing the trajectory of the storylines, I was thinking about the trajectory of how Effie became the adult that she is now. So, how it is that her childhood kind of carried with her into her adulthood, and how that informed who she is and informed her decisions. So, I had Effie in the present doing the things that she did and reacting and responding to situations the way that she does. And then it was like this kind of like beautiful link in that the next chapter I got to write was going back to her as a child. And so I was sort of just building together the little jigsaw pieces of how she became the adult that she became. So I didn't have the full jigsaw in my head when I started. I was more just like putting the pieces together as I went. And sometimes, occasionally, I might have written maybe 2 chapters in a row from one timeline. But in general, I went back and forth, just to keep it really fresh in my mind.
That is so interesting to me. In asking this, I'm probably going to reveal myself as somebody who has read a lot about internal family systems and various forms of therapy. But your reading the book really did make me think a lot about the ways in which the children that we once were still sort of live inside us. And that's something I think that you explore in a very interesting way by how you develop Effie and Anya's sort of like interactions and their growing sort of as they approach each other, you know, it almost has this feel of Effie like doing inner child work by by
Yes.
by working with Anya and trying to figure out what happened to her.
While so much of, I think, the way that our childhoods impact our adulthoods is based on memory. And
Mm.
it's a case of how sometimes how we remember our childhood, which might not always entirely be accurate. And it might be a particular memory that holds real weight and that can really impact you and affect you, like it does with Effie. Like the relationship she has with her father is just something that it's a lead inside her heart, her whole entire life. The same thing that the relationship she has with the trees and living off grid. But I think when she comes back to New Zealand and she meets Anya, she starts to almost question her memories of her childhood and is trying to make sense through Anya and through helping her of, okay, how I have depicted my life as a child and how it's affected me. Like, where is the line between reality and childhood memory blurred, and what is real and what is what I remember to be real? And so she is kind of going back to her childhood through Anya to kind of work out who she is, I guess.
In terms of the pacing of the story, I'm always interested in how dual timelines allow you to manipulate the pacing of a book.
Yes,
And
very
this
much
book,
so.
yeah. And there here especially, I feel like the book it avalanches, like it feels like a snowball in that like
Mm,
you could almost think at first that it was like a slow burn tension sort of thing, and then it just sort of creeps up on you like the what is it, like the frog in the boiling
yeah,
water,
yeah.
So how do you what is your approach to tension to pacing, tension, and especially how that works with like answering questions and asking new ones? How do you pace out like the information and how that develops the plot?
Yeah, I suppose with each chapter that I wrote, you kind of want to introduce a new question or two for the reader. And there'll always be those overarching questions that you know are not going to get answered for you straight away. But then there are those questions that pop up in that chapter that you, as a reader, expect to be answered in the next chapter. And you kind of build up that trust with the reader, like, okay, I'm going to create a question in this chapter, and I'm not going to give you all the answers, but I will answer that one if you stay with me. And the beauty of the 2 timelines approach is that for them to get the answer to that one, they can't just turn to the next chapter. They have to read through to get back to that timeline. So I love doing that, just putting in little breadcrumbs of information. And in some senses, it is slightly more slow burning at the beginning because it is so much in-depth insight into what it was to be a child living off-grid in the bush. And I didn't want this to just always be a fearful, negative experience. I wanted to have those chapters that actually show there was a warmth and a joy to living in the bush. And so there are those chapters where the pace slows a little bit to show that, okay, this wasn't just darkness for this child. There was moments of joy in this, but there's still that overlooming tension that is going, like you're saying, it's snowballing. And so as the chapters move on and as the months and years pass, that lightness gets less. And then as a result, the pace starts to pick up. And yeah, so I think it was just a case of wanting you to really understand what life was like, but at the same time wanting to create this sense of what's going to happen.
Those are really great insights. And I think it also speaks to sort of the way that like perhaps like the way that we experience time throughout our lives affects like the pacing of the book, because like a year for a child is so much longer than a year
Yes.
for a 40-year-old, or a 50-year-old.
Mhm.
And like summers and those good memories that you have as a child often do have this like timeless sort of unchanging quality to them.
Yeah.
That does lead to my question about like how you write a child's perspective or experience. How do you capture that voice and the sort of, I guess, I don't want to say limited understanding, but different understanding of what's going on around them?
So writing the child point of view is my absolute favorite. I think there's just so many things you can do with the child voice that add depth. This is particularly to a thriller because they've got that sense of naivety. They don't understand things fully. They do experience the world more, I don't know, more in depth than an adult because often everything is like for the first time for them and they don't have expectations on things, especially in like a stressful situation. An adult, you kind of almost know how they're going to react. Whereas a child, you don't. You often know what an adult's going to say, which kind of restricts your use of dialogue. But with a child, you don't always know how they're going to react and what they're going to say. They often, in a very horrible situation as well, they will find these little moments of light or joy and they might hold on to that. So I think the child voice is just such this kind of vulnerable, insightful, kind of heartbreaking way to experience this kind of trauma that they live through. And so I guess as a background to that, so I was a primary teacher of young children. And so I've had experience of just sitting in a classroom, hearing the way that children observe and talk about the world and how they interact with each other. And the other thing is I've always just been really fascinated with the impact of childhood and how it affects us as we grow up. Even at high school, I did a dissertation on whether the criminal is born or whether they're made, just looking at those things that happen to us in those early years and how they inform how we end up. And then also when I was writing this book, there's a Kiwi author who is very renowned over here called Catherine Chichi. And she happened to be running a workshop on writing the child point of view. So I went and did that when I was writing the first draft. And it just confirmed for me how much depth and scope a child can add to telling of a thriller.
That's fascinating. It makes so much sense to me that Effie is able to figure out so much about her own experience through her interactions with this child. It's an absolutely gorgeous story, and I really love the way that you use this mystery to explore trauma, something that is like literally unspeakable to, one of the characters, but also make it such an engaging thriller with such interesting twists. My last question concerns twists, not the content of them, but the
Yes.
strategy of them. How aware of you were of the twist that you planned in the process? Because I know you said that you didn't have a ton of notes.
Mhm.
And like when you do figure out the twists or the big reveals, does that ever require like sort of reverse engineering what comes before? Like how does that work for you?
I think twists come quite naturally as a consequence of not planning
Mm.
because you basically write yourself into this corner and you're like, oh my gosh, there's no way I can get out of this. And that's also where I want the reader to be like, well, there's no plausible explanation for this. This doesn't make any sense. And I just love that, mainly like lying in my bed before I go to sleep, trying to work out all the ways that this could have been possible. And I think that's where the magic for a twist come from when you're kind of going through all these ideas and then suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, this makes complete sense. This is what would have happened. Um, and so I think the whole way through when I was writing the book, there is this one particular relationship that Effie has with one member of her family. And as the reader, you're very confused by it. As the writer, I was very confused by it, trying to be like, come on, give me an insight into what is the truth behind this relationship and what is not memory and what is not a child's point of view, like what is actually going on here. And when it came to me, what that was and who that person really was, everything else just kind of made sense. I think when I worked out who this person was, it was like all the pieces fitted together. And the end of the story for me just came really quickly and in a way that I was like, of course, this is what happened.
Wow. I love that idea of writing toward not like a specific conclusion necessary, but toward like a Gordian knot that you have to solve for
Yeah.
yourself. That's fascinating. So what is next for you? Do you plan more twisty turny things? What's on your horizon?
So with this book, The Vanishing Place, I was like, I really want to write a nature-centric thriller,
Mm.
but also one where, you take time to create these beautiful images. So it's not just boom, boom, boom. You are taking time to immerse yourself in the setting and the emotions. So I was like, I want to create another book similar to that. So it's a nature-centric thriller set in New Zealand, but this time it is volcanoes and lakes rather than bush. And I'm about 2/3 of the way through the first draft, so I'm trying to work out the ending at the moment.
Wow, well, happy writing. That sounds exciting, and I cannot wait to read the next one. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with
Thank
me and
you.
our listeners. All right, so listeners, it's now your turn. Please check out The Vanishing Place. It's available as we are recording. It will be available when you hear this in November. So please head to your favorite bookstore or library or website, wherever you like to go for your books. Thanks so much for joining us again. It is time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.